All right. So, welcome everyone. We are in a new series, and this series is based on my book, The Money Poems, which I wrote with Mark Allen Felton. And I'm really excited. You can grab the book at Amazon.com. And I am excited to walk through this text with you. This book was actually written in, gosh, this book was actually written in oh, what do I want to say? 2009, 2008, 2009. And we published it in 2009 pseudonymously. And then after publishing it pseudonymously, we came back to the material in 2015 and we read it and was like, and it was just the poems then. And I was like, gosh, I really like what I'm reading. Like this feels like a really good text. I feel really good about it. And I'm like, let's brush it off and add some more. And so, and the thing is, when I wrote this, I had been in not ministry like as a minister, but like as a licensed spiritual teacher for probably 5 years, maybe. I had finished my license. I had not yet entered seminary. I had not yet gotten that tap on the shoulder from Reverend Della. But in 2015, I knew that I was going to be her successor, and we were just on a march for whatever day she was going to decide that she was, passing the baton. And we picked it back up, and now I've got all of the work that I've done since then, and started looking at this and said, this is good. And so that's when we fleshed out the other pieces and began to talk about the system that we put around the money poem. So I'm excited to share with you this material. The worksheets that I share with you will become part of a workbook for the money poems. So you guys are a part of helping create the workbook that will follow. So I'm excited about that. Let's take a moment to open in prayer and then let's dig right in. So right where you are, you just want to center your attention on the power and the presence of God. We were designed to be prosperous, healthy, happy, loving beings, filled with the light of God, being God in action wherever we go. I ask that this material that's in this book serve that purpose, that it serves to wake up a generation that has fallen asleep to its divine inheritance. I ask that those who read it, that their consciousness is touched, and that the true intent of the book reaches their hearts and reminds them that this is an abundant universe. There is plenty everywhere, and they ought to have it. I thank you, God, for using me in this way. I release this prayer to you, and I affirm in the nature and in the consciousness of I am. This prayer is so, and so it is. So one of the things that I'm doing differently this year is I want to emphasize the value and power of spiritual practice. And so I want to share with you at every class session things that are part of my personal spiritual practice. So the thing that I want to focus on tonight are just we talked about words last week, but this week I want to talk about specific words, like things that help you really stay focused so that you can bring out what is in you. That the seed, the seed for the future you is inside of you right now. You're carrying it. You are walking around with your future in you existing as potential. And it is incumbent on you to do the work to manifest that out, to develop yourself. And you do that through this kind of spiritual study that we're doing here, but also through the professional study that you are doing. And sometimes doing that work to release the depths of who you are is scary. It's vulnerable because you got to get raw. I think it's Reverend Galen. It says butt naked God, but it is, you've got to tell your deepest truth, whatever that is for you. And all the places where you're hiding from yourself, you got to strip those masks down. And, we, as we go through life, we put up so many masks because we don't want to be seen. We don't want to be seen because we feel like we won't be loved as we are. And, and so that is, that can be paralyzing. Uh-oh. That can be, paralyzing for a lot of people. And so that is, that's part of the spiritual journey. I just needed to text and let somebody know that yes, we are having class tonight. That can be paralyzing along the spiritual journey. And so one of the things that I do before I sit down to write, so I shared with you guys a couple of weeks ago that I have a project that I'm working on. I'm taking some material that I created for the Wealth Habits Academy, and we're turning it into a workbook. And I sit down every morning to work on it, and I've gotten to a full first draft. I know there are many more drafts to come, bracing myself for that. But I read this quote, and it's a Teddy Roosevelt quote, but I actually rewrote it in with feminine pronouns. And before I sit down to write every morning, I read this quote aloud to myself. And this is what it says: It's not the critic who counts, not the woman who points out how the strong woman stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the woman who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasm, the great devotions, who spends herself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if she fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that her place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. And I read that every morning. I have it written on a yellow note card, and I read it to myself. I wrote it out because there's I am putting it uh, uh, in on in my own handwriting. And like I said, I rewrote the pronouns because I'm a woman. So there you go. Um, and and that helps me to just sit down and do the work. I never want to lose that enthusiasm. It's really easy to get started with a project. The beginning is really, really wonderful. It's that middle part. It just says that all change is hard in the beginning, messy in the middle, and glorious at the end. And so sometimes we're in that beginning part and it's hard, but we got the enthusiasm to keep going. But when you hit that middle part, it's messy. You don't know which way to go. I'm at a place now where I'm like, do I go and try to get a publisher? Do I try to do this myself? Like, what do I do with this? And so you want to have something that keeps you going, that keeps you focused, that reminds you what it is that you're doing and the value of what it is that you're doing. And that quote speaks to me. So that's the spiritual practice I wanted to share with you today. So where we are today in the text is part one, my story, part one. And I will, as we go through, I will share with you, I won't read it verbatim, but I will share with you the parts of the story that are actually true, like things that actually happened. So the first thing is just the story of the money poem. So the actual what had happened was that Mark and I were both students of Johnny Coleman and Della Reese. And it was the height of the 2007, 2008 housing crisis. And Mark is a musician and a songwriter. And he said, throw out this idea of poems, and I was like, yeah, it's a good idea. And so I started writing, and so we wrote these poems together. And I don't remember exactly like how it all got started, but we were hanging out, and two artists, because at that time I was working in the entertainment industry. And so it was like, let's put something together. And so it just kind of came together organically. And it was a way for us to take what we had been learning from Reverend Della and Reverend Johnny and to put it on paper. I'm almost certain it was Mark's idea to make it poems, because as a songwriter, he's used to just writing music that reaches the heart. That music can go where sometimes the spoken word cannot. And so we got into doing the poems, and then that opened a whole other thing. And then it was like, well, we need to tell a story around these poems to help people understand how to use them. And now I had no idea that this is a whole genre of literature, kind of like The Richest Man in Babylon, where there's a story, it is a parable, and it's teaching a truth. I had my own ignorance. I did not know that there's a whole genre, but that was what this was. It was a parable to share, here's how the money poems are used, and it was framed in, here's where the poems come from. So Grandma Ellie. So no, my grandmother was not Grandma Ellie. She's Grandma Lenora. But as I was writing, because I wrote the story, as I was writing the story, I was absolutely thinking about my grandmother and what she passed down, and the image that's in my head of that scene where Denise is in the bedroom with Grandma Ellie and she's giving her that poem. In my head when I'm writing it, it's my grandmother's bed. It's the room that was off from the living room where my grandmother slept. So the story is of Denise. And Denise is, in her mind, her grandmother's favorite. And her grandmother gave her this poem. And she had a really wonderful relationship with her grandmother, because the grandmother would always share with her these amazing stories of her life. And she would show her these pictures of the good old days. This is on page 1. It says, as I grew older, throughout the years, Grandma Ellie would share many stories with us about her life. As a young adult, she lived a very wealthy lifestyle. She often showed us clippings from different magazines of her day. The society pages of those magazines were filled with pictures of Grandpa and her attending swanky events. What an exciting life she led. So this grandmother was everything to Denise. She was, she was, well, what all of our grandmothers are to us or have been to us. They're the history keepers. They are the ones who listen to our dreams sometimes when our parents can't. In some instances, our grandmothers raise us. They step in when the parents aren't able to do that work, and they're wise, and they watch us, and it's a different grandmother love is a different kind of love, isn't it? It's that kind of love that you can kind of get away with a little bit more, but not too much more. The grandmother's one that indulges you, that buys you the stuff that your parents don't want to spoil you with. Grandmothers are like that. They're wonderful. And so Denise has this kind of close relationship with her grandmother. She wants to know everything about her, and she's intrigued by this lifestyle that her grandmother is sharing. Like, where is this coming from? And so she asked her one day, she says, Grandma Ellie, what happened to the good old days? Why doesn't our family have any money anymore? Why are we so poor when you and Grandpa had so much money before? Like, what's going on? And Grandma Ellie doesn't immediately answer her, and Denise senses that something is being held back. She's not really like disclosing the full story here, and I don't know what it is. And then she gives her this cryptic thing where she says on page 2, Denise, baby, money comes to those who know how to manifest it. And if you can think of like, I don't know if we set an age for Denise at that time, but I think in my head, Denise was probably like an early teenager, maybe. And she's asking her grandmother, and she says, "Money comes to those who know how to manifest it." And she's like, "Manifest it? Like, I don't even know if that word is like in my vocabulary. Like, I know what it is because it's a spelling word, but like, what do you mean manifest it?" And so it's um it's baffling for her. Like it doesn't make any sense to her. And she says, "I had no idea what Grandma LA could possibly mean. How do you manifest money? Like, if you put your mind it back to when you were a teenager and someone said to you, manifest money, and it's like, what? Like, how is that? Is that the same thing as going and getting a job and going to work? Like, exactly what do you mean manifest money?" And then, she presses her grandmother to get more information. And the grandmother just says, "A poem a day brings money your way." What? Like, okay, what do we do with this? Now, if you've read the whole story, you know where this is going. But at this point, Denise is just confused. Okay, this woman who has shown her the pages of her life, and when she asks a point blank question, she gets this weird answer about manifesting and poems. And what are you talking about? Anyway, the story goes on that the riddle does become clear, but it becomes clear in the face of tragedy. The grandmother has a massive heart attack, and basically almost dies. And fortunately, she pulls through. But up until that point, she had been self-sufficient. She had been living on her own. Now she has to come and live with Denise and her family. And so it's she's a different grandmother. She's seeing her at the other side of her elder years. And it says that I'm on page 3. It says, "Gratefully and fortunately for all of us, Grandma Ellie did survive, but she would never be the same. All her life, she'd been very independent. And up until that point, I couldn't ever remember thinking of her as being old. She was always so young in spirit that I never thought about how old she might have been. But this heart attack changed everything. A different reality sunk in." And I would imagine that that probably has happened in your life, where a family member goes through an experience, and you think of them as immortal, and sometimes you don't think of them as passing away. I think about that today. We just learned that one of our icons, Cicely Tyson, made her transition and this afternoon, and she just released her autobiography, Just As I Am. And thinking about her making her transition, I mean, she was in her 90s working, lucid, present, delivering iconic performances in movies for Tyler Perry and Ava DuVernay, and we loved watching her on How to Get Away with Murder, playing the mother to Viola Davis. I mean, come on, that scene. Oh, the scene where she is I think she's greasing her scalp, in the scene, and Viola is sitting between her legs, and she's greasing her scalp, and that's so that scene, right, is so familiar to all of us because we've all had that kind of experience in our lives. It just feels so familiar. It feels like home, and to see that reflected on television. And so sometimes people take on this mythical proportion, and you don't have to be a celebrity to take on that mythical stature. You could be that mythical person for people in your lives because of the footprint that you leave, because of the way that you touch their lives. And so her grandmother was like that for her. And so seeing her brought down by this heart attack was it was devastating for her. And it was it in a different way. She had to learn how to make sense of the world. I mean, she's a teenager, in high school, but still trying to figure things out. And this person who was, someone who loved her dearly and whom she loved dearly, is now not the same. So the grandmother comes to live with them permanently, and they're each assigned a day of the week to take care of the grandmother. Now, we learned this later, but the grandmother has something that she wants to give to each of the children. And she doesn't talk as much as she used to, but they get a chance to just be with her and take care of her. And because there are 7 children, each child has a day of the week when they're responsible for helping the grandmother. And so it says Grandma Ellie didn't talk. I'm on page 4. Grandma Ellie didn't talk as much as she used to, but I always had the feeling there was something she wanted to share with us, and more specifically with me. She seemed to be looking for some way to do that. One Sunday, while I was cleaning her room, Grandma Ellie beckoned me to her bedside and pressed a worn piece of paper into my hand. Without saying anything, she looked deeply into my eyes and just smiled. I knew whatever she was giving me must have been extremely important, and it felt like something I should cherish. I stuffed the paper in my pants pocket and returned to my chores. Later, when I was alone, I pulled the worn piece of paper from my pocket and began to read it. To my surprise, it was a simple poem. It had a cute little rhyme to it, and although not very long, it seemed to speak volumes. At the time, I had no clue about the poem's value and power. Later, I would come to know the poem as being the Sunday money poem. I was so happy and loved that Grandma Ellie had given me a poem for the day of the week, that I was responsible for taking care of her. It felt like we had our own special bond. And I decided to keep my poem a secret so that my other brothers and sisters wouldn't become jealous of our relationship. In my mind, I was clearly her favorite. As I do today, I would carry my poem with me everywhere I went. Soon after that glorious day, Grandma Ellie would pass away. This triggered a deep sadness in our family. We loved her so much and would miss her dearly. She was such a proud woman and always wanted the best for us. On many occasions, and often to our discomfort, she would speak of a great monetary inheritance that awaited us. We would always try to silence her, as no one wanted to imagine what life would be like without her. Upon her passing, none of us had any expectation of any monetary inheritance. We were quite content with all the many cherished memories she left with us. As time went on, things got pretty rough for our family. My parents had to sell most of Grandma's belongings to cover all her past medical expenses. Besides a few pictures and some other artifacts, there weren't any physical items left of Grandma Ellie's. The simple poem she once gave me now took on an even greater significance. It was the only physical thing I personally had left of hers. I would read it often and it would give me great comfort. It was my way of staying connected to Grandma Ellie. And so that's part one. Now, principle. The grandmother is telling her of this inheritance. She's seeding the idea, right? She's seeding the idea. Anything that's going to come to pass in your experience, the idea has to be seeded. And, again, we have the benefit of knowing the whole story, right? We're not reading this just only this part. So we know what, comes, when she follows through with the poems. But I want you to get that there's a seeding that's happening, right? There's a tilling of the soil, there's an awakening of curiosity. In order to produce wealth in your experience, you're going to need to get a curiosity about that wealth. There has to be a question on your heart. Reverend Mary used to say that it's the questions. It's like when you're moving up the side of a mountain, and let's say you have on all of your hiking gear, but you're doing a serious hike. This one, you need some equipment. And what happens is you have this thing called a grappling hook. And so when you get ready to move up to another level of the mountain, the grappling hook you take and you throw up the side of the mountain and it hooks in the mountain, right? And then the tension of it holding in the mountain pulls you and you pull yourself up. And then you repeat the process again and you throw the hook up a little higher. The questions on your heart function like that grappling hook. The questions provide a tension that begins to pull you forward. Sometimes what happens when we are not expressing the abundance that is rightfully ours, we don't really have a question on our heart about abundance. We want it, but we're not curious about it. And so we never begin to ask the questions that would draw to us the information. You know, the Spirit says, ask and you shall receive. Knock and the door will open. Seek and you will find. Because and that's a law. It's going to happen. So if the demonstration is not there, if the answer is not there, it means the question is not being asked. I hope you hear that. If the answer that you are getting is not pulling you toward a greater expression of wealth, then the question about wealth has not yet been awakened on your heart. And you're going to need to go through that seeding process where you get curious. What would it take for me in my circumstance with things that look as they do and that are arranged as they are? What would it take for me to have wealth? Many times we have answered the question before it even gets to be asked out of our mouths and have settled it that it's not for us. So what's happening is that the grandmother is seeding this idea. She's stoking Denise's curiosity. Now, in an ideal world, we all have a grandma like that, or a mom like that, or a dad like that. But I want you to know, even if you don't have somebody in your life like that, you can stoke your own curiosity. You can seed the curiosity for yourself. And you can do that through reading, through being in conversations like what we're having right now, through being in communities like what we have at Up Church or other New Thought churches, where you're beginning to awaken the questioning spirit. Whatever it is that you want to demonstrate in your life is first going to be set in motion by a question that awakens in your heart. Any questions on that? Any response on that? Y'all give me a heart, a high five, a fist bump, or something, a reaction. Where we at? How's that resonating with you? All right, I said I got one thumbs up. Cool, cool. Well, anything? What are you hearing? What is this waking up for you? And while you're doing it, I'm gonna check the chat on the over here on the thing. Anybody else? And you can unmute yourself if there's something, if you want to talk live.
I like when you said the question is like a grappling hook. You have to keep going a little bit deeper in order to really get to the solution sometimes. Sometimes the solutions are right there, but then sometimes I guess when I'm not being receptive, I just got to go a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper. So I like the grappling hook thing.
Yes. I wish I could claim that, but that belongs to Reverend Mary. So, as you know, she sold into all of us. But it is that idea. And I'm a hiker. I don't hike with equipment, but I hike. And so this idea of being able to go up a little higher, go up a little higher, or go a little deeper, whatever analogy or metaphor works for you. Anybody else? Anything else? All right. Wonderful. Let me keep going. So that's part one. And so what I want to do, I want to do just a quick breakout session. We have 8 people. Okay, great. 8 people. So I'll do 2 groups. And so I want this idea of seeding. I want to talk about that, and I want you to just share one way that you can apply that in your experience. So I'll open the breakout rooms, and all right, here we go. Okay, wonderful. Am I missing anybody? Okay, great. All right, so we'll go into breakout rooms. We'll just take 5 minutes, so it's not a lot of time, but we just want to share one thing that you can do to seed the idea, a question that you can begin to ask to seed the idea of abundance in your heart. So you'll get the alert that says join the breakout room, and you just click join, and that will put you in the breakout room. And I will jump in to a couple of these rooms as well, um, to see how it's going. Gloria, Wanda, yeah, you gotta hit there. We go. Okay, all right, I'll go to this room first.
Hey,
Hi.
Oh, hey.
Hey.
Clarice, you want to unmute?
Yes, 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 yes. I mute. So let's talk about this idea of seeding. How will you seed the idea?
Okay,
Or
now
what
this is a
question
problem
will you
I
ask?
need understanding. Can you hear me though?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Right. So we're seizing abundance and we're asking ourselves a question, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's
So
the
think of it this way: what's a bigger question that you can ask to get, like, right? So let me say it differently. You're getting the answer to the question that you're asking right now. So
yeah, my
your
current business,
money
right?
looks like the question you're asking right now. What's
Yeah.
a bigger question that you could ask?
A bigger question, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think what I don't get is the question that I'm asking right now is probably what I don't even know. Like I don't
Okay.
even know. If I
Okay.
knew what I was asking right now, I would then have a bigger question to ask.
So let me tell you a story. I have a family member. I was about to, she may not want me to tell her business. I have a family member who is a teacher, and when she started working at a university, she was probably one of the lowest paid people at the university, and she knew she needed to have more money because she had children that she needed to raise. And so she began to figure out, like, okay, what is it going to take? And she figured out that, okay, if I go get more hours toward my degree, like, what you have your master's and you have hours beyond your master's that you take. If I go get more hours, then that makes me eligible for these pay raises. And so she would go and study the pay raise chart to then look and say, if I do these things, then I'm now eligible for these additional pay raises. And so over a certain number of years, she was able to literally triple her salary simply by studying the pay scale to add more. Do you get the question that she was asking?
Yeah.
Got
Yeah.
it. And I'm saying that the resource, this is true of all of us, not just you, me too. The resources we have are a result of the questions that we're asking at this level. And if we're going to have
Okay, but
greater,
this is in a work setting, right?
ask bigger questions. So go ahead, say it one more time.
This is in a work setting actually it's structured, but we're in like a life setting and everything is so general. Understand what I'm saying? Like there's so many questions you can bigger questions you can ask. Maybe I can be like, what better shoes like do I need to wear Jordan?
You're breaking up a lot. You're breaking up a lot.
Hold
Uh,
on 1 second.
okay. All right. While you're fixing your reception, VJ, Clarice, any
Yes.
question could you ask?
I don't exactly have a question, but I was thinking that often what we do is we dream too small.
Yes.
And so we need to, if we're going to plant seeds, we need to ask a question with that we're not settling.
Yes.
This is what I'll settle for, but that should not be your dream. What
Yes.
you settle for should not be your dream.
Yes. 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 VJ, what about you?
Well,
Hmm.
I guess what I'm settling for, as you say, Clarice, is not my dream, but my question is, I am a hiker, and I believe in, as you say, Reverend Sherry, hiking up the next
Mhm.
ladder. So I've I've got that first star. God is blessed.
Yes.
Now the question is, well, the answer is, okay, let's put some legs on this blessing
Yes.
and let it move. And
Yes.
I'm letting it move.
Yes. And so a question would be, how else can I let it move?
Yes.
Yes.
But you want to start to invite. Questions invite. Statements shut things down.
Okay.
Questions invite. So here's something. Many times we think of being, older and we're on a fixed income. A question could be, how can I unfix my income? Just working with that idea. Just if you went to God in prayer and asked God, because I think it was Reverend, I said it, but then I heard somebody else say it. I was like, oh, I guess I wasn't the first who said, if your income is fixed, you fixed it. So the question is, how can I unfix my income? Like, what's possible? One.
So and how does the answer will show up? But is there a time, like how long should you be waiting for the answer to manifest or start showing up in your life?
You get it. This is the thing. God is
Oh,
always speaking, right? Ask
Right.
and you shall receive. There's no time limit on it. It's not ask and you shall receive tomorrow. God is
Right.
as instantaneous as us. The continual asking is for us, not for God.
Reverend Sherri,
Yes.
it'll show up when he believes it.
Yes. And sometimes you got to ask
mm.
until you believe it. Sometimes the asking is the believing process.
Right. It's not just saying it, it's
Yeah.
believing it.
Mhm.
Yeah. The law does not respond to what you say, it responds to what you
What you say?
believe.
Come on, Clarice. Let me go check on the other group. Oh,
plan, and they're just not the correct one.
I'm coming to check
Oh,
on y'all. How's it going?
okay.
Hey there.
Hey,
Hey, we're doing good.
Good, good, good. What questions did you guys come up with?
I
yes,
I don't know how this relates to the seeds, but through prayer, I ask the questions to make the right decisions to bring me to a path of wealth.
That's it. That's
hmm
it. That's it. And then is that God, I don't know if I heard you. Could you make it a little bit clearer?
Hmm.
It's like
yeah,
it is, I expect to be wealthy.
and I think we were kind of, clearing up with what are the correct seeds to plant.
Right. But let me tell you, the question, make it as real as you possibly can for yourself, meaning where it hits your soul, right? So for example, and I shared this in the other group, that many times we think of being older as like being on a fixed income. But we could ask the question, hey God, how do I unfix this income? There's nothing that says that older means a fixed income.
Hmm.
That's just an accepted idea of what it means to be older. But there's no law, there's no spiritual law standing underneath that. And so it's like, ask the question that's real for your soul, because that's the one that's going to get you moving. That's the one that's going to, like, you know, you know, hit you in the gut. One of the questions that I started asking, and it's why I started becoming a financial professional, was I looked around and said, wait a minute, I'm headed for retirement and I'm nowhere near ready for retirement. Meaning I could stop working, but then I'm gonna start working like a few minutes later. So that the questions, it's like make the questions real for you because you're working with God. God is your partner. So it's the question should be as real as you can make them for you, not for anybody else. So hope that helped. All right, going back to the main room. To uh closing in 2 minutes. Those were really, really good sessions and good stuff. The law does not respond to what you say. The law responds to what you believe. That was Clarice. And then asking the question that is true to your soul. That is what you want to do. All right, let me go ahead and close these breakout rooms and let us come back in session. Let me check the.
What happens on Facebook Live where we go into the groups?
So it follows wherever I am. So whatever group that I'm in, that's the part that's being recorded. So the part where I was in the room, it was recorded, but the part where I was not in the room was not.
Thanks.
The recording tracks what I'm, where I am. All right. So we are on page 7. This is my story part 2. So now this part, this is true. This actually happened. A year after Grandma Ellie left us, I graduated from high school and went away to college. Of course, I carried my poem with me and read it whenever I missed her or just needed to feel better. During my first 2 years in college, there were 2 things that happened which changed how I viewed the precious poem Grandma Ellie had given me. The first incident occurred during the end of my first year. Being the 4th of 7 children, I had little money available to me to pay for my college education. My parents were pretty tapped out financially when it was my turn to go to college. Nonetheless, I was determined to attend college, and not just any old college, but an Ivy League school. True story. It didn't matter that I didn't have Ivy League money. I was driven, I applied, and because of my grade point average, I was accepted. In addition, I received a small scholarship. When I entered college in 1988, I arrived with precious few belongings, but a conviction that I would complete my education no matter what. True story. Back home, my parents worried incessantly that I would be sent home for lack of money. True story. That first year was pretty tough. Many of my classmates had all been educated at boarding schools or overseas or both and seemed to be rolling in money, while I obviously struggled. But that didn't matter to me because here I was at this prestigious university being educated alongside the sons and daughters of senators, congressmen, and business tycoons, and yet I was holding my own. I had never experienced anything quite like that before. Although quite intimidating, I enjoyed every moment. In my first year, my scholarship covered most of my basic expenses, but not all. I still had a balance due to the university. I had no clue how I was going to pay it. True story. I just knew that I couldn't ask my parents for any money. My 3 younger siblings would soon be attending college and they would need every penny to help them along their way. Besides, I didn't want to be any more of a burden than I had already been. Yet if I couldn't pay this balance, I would have to stay home the following year. My dream of graduating from an Ivy League school seemed to be evaporating right before my eyes. I was in and out of the financial aid office so often that my counselor knew me by name. True. I had already been granted the maximum amount of aid for my family's financial scenario. Determined to make it, I spent hours in the library during my second semester researching scholarships and grants. Unfortunately, everything I found was for students just leaving high school or students heading to graduate school. It seemed I had no options and I was at my wit's end. I didn't want to go back to my counselor to ask for more money, but I also didn't want to sit out a year because of money or worse, change schools. So reluctantly, I set yet another meeting with my financial aid counselor. He had done so much for me already. I didn't really know what another meeting could accomplish. I just knew that I didn't want to be told that I couldn't come back the following year. As I headed to his office, I had this overwhelming feeling of Grandma Ellie's presence. Out of a natural reaction, I suddenly reached for my purse to retrieve the priceless poem she had given me. That part is not true. Grandma Ellie's poem had always been a source of comfort, which is exactly what I needed at that moment. I read it slowly, and as usual, it gave me such a consoling feeling to speak those words. I just felt like everything was going to be all right. Um, then, like out of a fairy tale book, the unexpected happened. My meeting with my counselor played out like a dream coming true. He had been preparing to tell me that I would not be able to return to school the following fall because of my past due balance. But right before I walked into his office, he received a phone call from an alumnus of the university who wanted to offer a supplemental scholarship to a deserving student with good grades. It just so happened my grades were impeccable that year, and my counselor felt that I was the perfect candidate to receive the scholarship. Coincidentally, the amount of the scholarship was exactly the amount of money I needed to meet the monetary shortage for my first year. I was overwhelmed. My counselor was astonished at the turn of events and happily awarded me the alumnus's gift. Amazingly, I was able to return to school the following fall. And then just as extraordinary, and this story, so these stories are actually true stories. There just was no poem involved. So let me say that. So then there's a story of her running into or needing books and running into the school administrator and being granted use of the school's of her department account to purchase the books. So those two things actually did happen in real life. Um, and so she's attributing, the poem is the lowest common denominator in this. But the principle that I want you to get, so I can tell you what was happening with me when those things happened. It was this sense of, we're going to figure this out. This is going to work. But in the story, we're using the poem. And what I want to give you is that the way out of a problem is to outgrow the problem. The way to overcome a challenge is you have to outgrow the challenge, or you have to be bigger than the challenge. Many times what keeps us in limited circumstances is that we feel smaller than the problem that we're facing. And so we never really give a full effort to get out of it because it feels so big and so looming, and we're looking at it compared to ourselves, how we see ourselves. And so while in real life there was no poem involved with it, there was the sense of, this is a solvable thing. And not only is it solvable, but I will solve it. The circumstances in your life are not bigger than you. You are bigger than them. And when you become bigger than the seeming problem disappears. It is only a problem because you see yourself as smaller. And so I want to give you a worksheet to carry with you this week and work with. And I want to walk through it right now. And this is to outgrow your problem. So those of you that are watching on Facebook, as soon as I upload it, I will put the link in the show notes and you guys will be able to pull it from the show notes, or you can email me or send me a private message on Facebook Messenger and I will upload the sheet to you. If you're on my email list, this sheet was attached to your email. So you have to outgrow your problems. The only problem you cannot solve is the one you're smaller than. There's nothing you're facing right now that you cannot overcome. It really does not matter how big your problem seems to be. How big are you? That is the important thing. Train yourself to be bigger than your problems. Then what you face becomes inconsequential. It starts with new words and new actions to support those words. And in less time than you think, you can change the trajectory of your life. And so this column, I want you to take some time either tonight or this week, but before we come back together, And I want you to list every challenge that you're facing. That's what goes in that left-hand column. A current challenge that I am facing, whatever it is. If it is, I've got to pay this bill and it's $3,000 and that number right now is too big, seems too big for me. Or it is, I've got to replace my car and I don't know how I'm going to replace the car, or whatever it is, whatever is the current challenge that you're facing. I just want you to just write that list down. You may have to print out more than these. There are not that many blanks. So you may fill that up. Then what I want you to do is I want you to have one positive thing that I can say to shift my attention, to shift your attention. So what was happening with the poems with Denise is that when she would face the problem, she would read the poem and the poem would reorient her. Reading is, we don't talk about reading as being a spiritual practice, but reading can be a spiritual practice if you are reading the right thing, because it will reorient you. It'll pull your attention back from whatever thing it has been given to. And so, in other words, it's the words, right? It's something that you can say to shift your attention. I share with you the spiritual practice of having powerful words to support you as you reach for the thing that God put inside of you. That, when I sit down to write, I read. It's not the critic who counts, not the woman who points out how the strong woman stumbles. It doesn't have to be it can be a single word, or it can be a phrase, or it could be a full quote, like something like this, but it's just something that I can say that can shift my attention. It might be something as simple as God is greater. I might be facing something that feels so big that I might need to be reminded that God is greater. And then what is one positive thing I can do to shift the momentum in my favor? One positive thing. And so that's what you're going to begin to look for. It's like what happens when you take action? Action erases fear. Action erases fear. And so then what that looks like then is you are basically, what you're doing is you're choosing a solution, right? So just like Denise had the poem, and the poem would shift her attention and then she would move into action. If you notice, she never just read the poem and then just sat still. She read the poem and then moved into action, right? So what is the one positive thing that you can say and then move into action, something positive that you can do? And then once you have a complete list, then you want to challenge yourself to use the words and actions you've listed. And so you have a journal on the next page to actually track your progress. And so you want to use this chart to track your progress. So you want to list the situation as it occurs. So you might have this sheet with you that you're working with every day. Okay. And every day you have the list of things that you're facing. And so every time that it came up, if it's, I've got a problem with my back, right? And my back is hurting. So what's my word or my phrase? So my back is hurting. What's my word or my phrase? My phrase is health. And then what's one positive thing that I can do? Well, I can do a sit-up. I can do 2 sit-ups. Let's just say that's my thing, right? So every time that something comes up with my back, did I use my word or my phrase? It's a yes or no. It's nothing, no in-betweens up in here. Did I take positive action? Did I follow through on the positive action I gave myself? Right? That's a yes or no question. And then what are my observations? And then it said, well, I observed that that it came up, but I didn't do anything about it. Or I observed that, when I spoke the word, the pain in my back seemed to lessen, or whatever it is, you're just making note of it. So you want to print these out, and again, you're using this because what you're trying to do, or what I want you to do, is I want you to come off of autopilot. Part of what allows problems to continue to persist in our experience is that we're on autopilot. And so we can't see how we're actually letting things be in our experience. And so we want to come off of autopilot and focus and begin to awaken to what is actually happening, and we want to set some intention around the thing that we want to be, that we want to dissolve in our experience. So if it is a pain in the body, or a wealth issue, or a money issue, or a relationship issue, or whatever, is that I've got a positive word for it. A good positive word might be some scripture, or and then you want to have a positive action for it, a positive word for it, and a positive action, right? Because when we're looking at the story with Denise, it's the same thing if we were looking at a story in the Bible. What's the principle, right? Because this is a really wonderful, fanciful story, but what if I didn't memorize these poems and I'm someplace that I can't get to these poems? I need to have my own formula for how I can respond to the things that are happening in my experience. Any questions? No questions. Okay, great. So I guess this is just clear. Good, good, good. Good, good, good. All right. Wonderful. So please take these worksheets. If you need them, let me know and I will. But those of you that are watching on Facebook or YouTube, I will have the link in the show notes, and you'll be able to download the worksheets. And you just want to work with them. And again, the purpose of all of this is coming off of autopilot. It's coming off of autopilot, and you're getting present to what is it I'm saying in the moment when these problems appear. Wonderful. Thank you so much for tonight. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Next week, we will do parts 3 and 4. Parts 3 and 4 of My Story. The name of the chapter is My Story. My Story Part 1, My Story Part 2, My Story Part 3, My Story Part 4. So we're going to do parts 3 and 4 next week. All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Alita, he's upstairs. I can't believe you don't hear all that noise.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Have a good night.